window, and the weather seemed perfect. It was one of those rare autumn days that we got, the sun was out, the air was warm, and I was feeling like $1 million. And I just turned to Lois and I said, you know, honey, this is probably going to be the last good day of the year. I've got to get out. I've got to just get some exercise. I'm going to play golf. I had access to a club over in Staten Island. I said, honey, I'm going to go play golf. I needed to get. My brother-in-law was the member. I played, he paid. I'm going to go play golf. She tried to talk me out of it. I couldn't be put off, and finally she relented, gave me a few dollars should I have some expenses, and she went off to work, and an hour or so later, about 11 o'clock, I went up to the attic, I got the clubs, changed my clothes, and actually walked down the hill to the ferry, Staten Island ferry, from Brooklyn to Staten Island. Stood out on the deck. Imagine that, in the middle of November, and I'm in the middle of New York Harbor, and it's a beautiful, warm, lovely day, and I am alive for the first time in months. Now, on the other side, we needed to board a bus to carry us the 8 or 10 miles to the country club where I was to play golf. And in climbing on the bus, I spot a fella carrying a rifle. Now, I don't know about you, but in New York, if you see somebody with a gun, you want to keep an eye on him. So I sat directly behind him, and if he were to make a move with that rifle, well, I'd have a club out of that bag in seconds, and I'd dust him off. But he didn't make any kind of a move. We went for a few stops, and finally I became curious, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, hey, pal, where are you going with this rifle? And as it turned out, he was going to a shooting match at a gun club, a hunting club, adjacent to the country club that I was going to play golf on. Small world. Now, you must realize this is the first human being I've spoken to, outside of my wife and a few tradesmen, in the last couple of months, so I decided to make the most of it. I begin to tell this gentleman, this stranger, everything I know about rifles. Having been born in Vermont, hunted all my life, I figured I knew quite a bit. And he was impressed. But then he began to tell me what he knew about rifles. Would you believe it? He knew more than I did. And I couldn't suffer that. I mean, I had to be number one in the rifle business. So I reached back into my memory and I started to talk about some really big rifles. I was in the artillery during the First World War, so I started to talk about cannons and trajectories and ballistics and velocity. And when I concluded, he said, mister, you really know your rifles. And I was number one in the conversation. I was beginning to get that old feeling back, when all of a sudden, we get rear-ended by a taxi cab. Just ran smack into the back of the bus. We climb off, we check the damage. It wasn't much, but it was sufficient that the driver had to wait for the police to come to make out a report. So that's how I found myself, standing with a complete stranger, him with a rifle and me with a golf bag, waiting for a bus. I thought we looked pretty foolish, really out of place. And we're just standing there, and all of a sudden, he spots a bar across the street. He said, hey, Mac, he said, why don't we go over and wait in the bar? And when the new bus arrives, they can come and collect us, and we'll continue the trip. I said, okay, by me. So he made arrangements with the driver, told him where we were going to be, and we crossed the street, and we entered the bar. They had just opened it up. It was a former speakeasy. We sat at the bar, and as I recall, he had a highball, a whiskey and ginger ale. The bartender said, what would you like? And I said, just a glass of ginger ale, thank you. And when he left, my friend turned to me and says, you don't drink? And I said, no, not me. And then for whatever reason, and I'm sure it was ego, I decided to tell this complete stranger my life history with alcohol. Drop by drop, shot by shot, loss by loss, you know. Took about a half hour. When I finished, he said something that indicated to me that he was a very intelligent man. Because he said, mister, you're remarkable. And that was the nicest thing anybody had to say about me in years. So I figured he had to be smart to realize that. He said, I know a lot of fellas like you. He said, but they're gone to us now. They're lost. They're either dead, they're in institutions, prisons, they're living in the weeds, Skid Row. They're gone, but you seem to have taken hold of yourself. You are truly remarkable. He said it twice. I wanted to kiss him. I mean, I needed that nourishment. Well, finally, the new driver came and collected us, and we continued the trip. But I didn't want to let the guy go. I needed that affirmation. So I suggested to him, I said, sir, you told me you don't start shooting until 2 o'clock. Am I correct? He said, that's right. I said, well, I don't tee off till 1:30, and it's just going on noon. Why don't you join me in my club? Forget my brother-in-laws. Come to my club. We'll have some lunch. And then, as it turned out, after it was over, all I had to do was go out a back door, cross the field, and he was shooting in 5 minutes. Well, he wasn't stupid. Pass up a free lunch. He said, I'd be delighted. So we came to my stop. We both got off, and we entered the clubhouse, and we're walking to the dining room when the manager comes up and says, Mister, can I help you? And I said, no, we're just going for some lunch. He says, oh, gee, fellas, I'm sorry. The dining room is closed today. It's Armistice Day. We've given the staff the day off. It was November 11th. He was right. We've given the staff the day off. We're not serving lunch. I'm sorry. But he said, if you'd like, we can prepare a sandwich for you in our bar. Will that be all right? My friend turned to me and said, is that going to bother you? And I said, of course not. You witnessed the cure down the road. I can go into a bar. I have no problem. So we entered that bar. And again, we sat up on the stools, and bartender came over and took our order. Again, he had a highball. I had a ginger ale, and we made arrangements for some sandwiches to be made. And when he left, my friend turned to me, and apparently he was getting smarter by the minute. He said, you know, sir, you're fantastic. That's a heck of a lot better than remarkable. He said, here you are in a sea of booze, and you're saying no to it. And he was right. In front of us was every size, shape, color bottle of liquor you could imagine. And you know what? The glass mirror behind it, it looked like an ocean of alcohol, and I was turning it down. I was cured. I had done it. I had pulled off the impossible. I realized also that when I got home that night, I must call Dr. Silkworth and tell him of the mistake he made. He shouldn't go around scaring people like my wife and I with this notion that I was a washed-up alcoholic. Not me, not Bill Wilson. Well, we finished our drinks, ate our sandwiches, we had a very, very nice lunch. We even made arrangements, he and I, to meet back in the city the following day to discuss a business opportunity. I was getting mainstreamed on my first day out. I was getting right back into the action. It felt wonderful, really, truly wonderful. I was back in control. Finally, the time came and I called for the check to sign it so my brother-in-law wouldn't have any problem paying for it. And we're about ready to leave, but the bartender returned. And this time he had 2 mixed drinks already prepared. He put one down in front of me and one down in front of my friend, 2 highballs, and he said, gentlemen, these are on the house in celebration of Armistice Day. Without a moment's hesitation, I reached over and I picked up my drink and I drank it down. And when I turned to my pal, my buddy, well, he wasn't smart looking anymore, I can tell you that. Matter of fact, he had the dumbest expression I've ever seen on a human being. His mouth wide open. He said, mister, after what you told me, for you to drink that, you got to be crazy. You got to be insane. And the only thing my pride had left me to say was, oh, I'm sorry, didn't I tell you I am crazy? I'm sorry, did I forget that? I am insane. That's all I could say. My wife found me that evening in the areaway between the outside door and inside door of our house back in Brooklyn. I had fallen, cut my forehead, bleeding, still clutching that unused bag of golf clubs. I didn't play golf that day. I got fallen down, stinking drunk, and I proved the doctor absolutely right. For the following morning when I woke up and I looked at the wreckage around me, I realized that I was an alcoholic. I'd be one the rest of my life, and when I died and they pulled the grass over my head, I'd be a dead alcoholic, and there's absolutely nothing I could do about it. I was cooked. But I also knew that morning that I'd be damned before I die in some lunatic asylum. Not me. And that morning I made up my mind to drink myself to death, or perhaps gather up the Dutch courage, whatever it took, to take my life. But this time, I was going to end it. And that's what I did from that day forward. I begged, borrowed, stole the $1 it took to get the 3 pints of bathtub gin that took to get me off the planet for the day. Sitting in my kitchen day in and day out,